Hi, Tracy here. Welcome back. And if you're new, welcome to my home here in Sussex, England. Today I've got 22 DIYs for you. This is home decor that is affordable, it's achievable, it's a high-end finish, and best of all, it uses very few power tools. In fact, the only power tool we're going to use today is a sander.
Let's start with a super simple way to change the look and feel of any lamp. Quite happy with the paint finish on this one. It's chalk paint and black wax. And I've wrapped the flecks because I like to do that to hide those ugly flexes. Not really liking the shade anymore. So let's get that down onto the floor and we can make some changes. Now I've got my glue gun out, scissors and some coir. It's the same coir that I've used on the flex, so it's all going to coordinate. Now once I get that shade off, I'm left with the black lamp holder, which is not the prettiest thing in the world. So it's that we're going to disguise. Now you don't just have to use coir, you could use ribbon, you could use different types of string, wire, beads, anything that suits your decor. And the great thing about this technique is it's completely reversible. When you want to use a shade again, just take it off. To complete the look, I'm going to add a vintage style LED bulb. Staying with lamps, we're going to do a complete transformation on these two. Now I picked these up in a charity shop for just £7.50 each. They're quite modern, made in 2015 by a decent manufacturer, and they've also had an electrical check, so I know they're safe to use. Now, somebody has tried to do a makeover on these and, well, quite frankly, it's not floating my boat, so we're going to change it drastically. I'm going to do my faux stone technique. Now, if you're a new viewer here, let me explain. So I'm going to use a jointing compound, a wall filler as we would call it. I'm also going to use some earth, some dirt, some leftover herbs and spices. So I've got cinnamon, I've got some coffee, I've got some grout. I've also got, which is my absolute favourite, cayenne pepper, and this mixed spice is well out of date, as are these mixed herbs, so they're going to be used. As this is a quick drying filler, I only ever mix up in small batches. Now, once I've added the water to it and I've got it to a nice pliable state, I just literally slap it on and just keep working it on and working it round. I tend to use a patting motion as well. It just helps it to stick. And whilst it's still wet, I then start to add on the other ingredients. So I normally start with the compost first and really start rubbing that in. That gives it that lovely earthy colour. And then I'll just start building up with all the other herbs and spices. This is a great technique for clearing out your cupboards, and rather than throwing things in the bin, you can reuse them. I often get asked, do the spices, do the herbs fall off? Well, no, if you're applying this properly and really working them into the mixture, then they dry inside that mixture. They dry stuck to it. So you shouldn't really get anything falling off at all. The other question I get asked is, do I seal them? Now, I don't tend to because they're not in high touch areas. But if you are having something in a high touch area, then yes, you could use some matte varnish. Just spray it over and let it dry back and you'll be absolutely fine. I purposely haven't covered up the flecks here or the lamp holder because I'm going to do something with those. But in the meantime, I'm going to let this dry overnight on top of the range. I've just popped it on a plate for ease of movement. There we go. We've got both done and now we're ready to take it to the next stage when it's completely dry, and as it dries it lightens as well. Oh, and if you're new here, meet Bertie, my furry supervisor. I'm going to hide the ugly flecks by wrapping coir all the way around. I just glue one end, wrap, and then glue at the other end. It's as simple as that. And of course, you can use whatever material suits your decor, and it's completely reversible. Onto the lamp holder now. I want to change the shape of it, so I want it to be quite cylindrical and the same diameter from top to bottom. So I'm going to put lots of glue on and then do plenty of wraps at the bottom to bring the shape out, and then carry on just wrapping all the way up to the top until it's quite even all the way up. A great way to change a look and feel of a lamp is as simple as changing the light bulb. I found these on Amazon, so I will link them below, and I just thought they were a super sexy shape, and a shape not too dissimilar to the curves of the lamp. I found this wooden tray with metal corners for just £5 in a local charity shop, but the brown lacquer wasn't really doing it for me, so the sander came out. I always try and get as much off with the machine, let the machine take the strain. The other side of it was actually the top, quite tricky to get off. It had a really thick brown lacquer, but the Merker did its work, the sander did its work, and then I just finished off with some hand sanding. The brown lacquer, the brown varnish, was all over the metal, but surprisingly with the sander it just took it back and it revealed beautiful brass. Now, it's a little bit honey for me, so I'm going over it with some white wax, just lots and lots of white wax, and I've left the grain quite open, so I've not used a much finer sandpaper to close it up. I've also pulled the white wax over the brass because that just dulls it down a little bit, which is more to my taste. Let's do another tray, only we're going to do this one differently. So again, this was a charity shop find. It was £5. It's quite an old one, quite a nice quality one as well. I did try a little bit of sanding, but it wasn't really looking very good. So I've got the Annie Sloan On Fleur out, and I'm going to completely coat it with a nice layer of chalk paint. And then we're going to do a crackle glaze effect, but we're going to do it with glue. Now you can use any kind of glue. I've got some leftover wood glue, so I'm going to do that. And once the glue has gone tacky, I'm going to layer over another coat of paint. I'm going to use Annie Sloan Cocoa and then finish off with some dark wax. This 6-foot coffee table used to be a dining room table, and we've had it for decades. I decided to cut down the pedestal in order to lower the top, and then we could use it as a coffee table. It's had various paint effects over the years, but now it's time to give it a new lease of life. Now I've flipped the table over because I want to paint the underneath. I'm bringing out my chalk paint brushes, another one that I might use, a stirrer, a flipper to take the lid off, some spraying in case I want to spritz my brush, gloves, damp cloth, glasses because I can't see anything, and a tray, which I find really useful to put everything on. We're going with Annie Sloan Chalk Paint Cocoa. I love this colour. And I'm a great fan of stirring. You need to make sure your paints are room temperature and really well stirred. Now you may be wondering why I'm painting the underneath of the table. Well, it's because I don't want people to see an unfinished table underneath, because we quite often throw cushions down on the floor and lay in front of the fire. And I know every time I see it, I would just be judging myself that I haven't done a terribly professional job by painting the whole thing. So I just find it easier as well to get at that pedestal by flipping the table over, and I can get in and out of everywhere. And then when I turn it the right way round, I can just very easily touch up any bits that I've missed. Now I'm painting this in a way to create texture. So once I've actually got the paint on there with the big Annie Sloan brush, then I'm using like a stabbing motion on the first pass, and then as it starts to dry, I go back over it again, and this creates a lovely textured finish without having to add any sand or any other medium to it. After the first coat, I don't want to waste time or paint washing that brush because there's lots of paint still in there. So I always wrap my brush in cling film. I actually use a smaller one as well, and then wrap them up in a carrier bag, and that just stops the air getting to them. And the other thing to remember to do is put the lid back on the tin. Now the underneath is dry, I'm going to flip the table back over so I can work on the top. Now I'm using the cardboard, talk about recycling here. This is the same cardboard that I used when I did the kitchen table a couple of weeks ago. I waste nothing. This is not going to be a terribly messy job, and chalk paint, if you catch it straight away, will just wash off these floors anyway. It doesn't really create a lot of splatter doing it this way, so just with those bits of cardboard underneath for where the paint comes down on the feet, on the second coat, that's all I'm going to need to protect it. I've done 2 coats now, and that's given me ample coverage. I'm happy with the texture that's been created. So now, before I start to wax, I'm going to do a little bit of distressing. This is not essential, but I've got my Merker, it's got an extraction unit on it, so it's not going to create a huge amount of mess. I am basically going to just tickle that head over the top, just because I like that sort of worn, distressed look. If you wanted to do this type of sanding and you don't have an extraction unit with your sander, you could always just get the nozzle of a vacuum cleaner, and as you sand, suck up the dust as you go. Now I'm going on with the clear wax first. So if you haven't used the wax before on top of chalk paint, it will darken the colour slightly, so always be aware of that. Now the whole piece is protected with the clear, I'm now going to go on with some white wax. I'm not applying it uniformly. I'm getting build-ups in certain areas, and I'm just playing around with it. I've brought out my very reliable, probably 20 years old Annie Sloan brush, and this one is great for, it's really quite stiff, so it's great for adding little blobs of wax on there. All the time I'm creating texture. Now I'm going on with a dark wax now. I'm just having a play around with this, just seeing if I can get more texture. The great thing with clear wax as well is you can use it almost like a rubber and a razor. So if you put too much in one spot, you can use the clear to remove it. Now I'm loving the effect that rubbing in with this rag is creating. So I am going to keep working my way around the table until I'm happy with the finish. Then I leave it to dry overnight. If you want a sheen, then 24 hours after applying, that's when you can buff it and get a nice sheen. When you're going around charity shops, thrift stores, you often find crockery for very low price because it's had repairs, it's been chipped, it's been cracked. Well, this bowl was a case in point. It was a really good size, and of course I knew I could do my stone technique on it, which is a great technique to hide any of those imperfections, any of those repairs. So I did exactly what I did before, but what I also like to do, and I didn't mention it last time, is when I come to the end of doing the stone technique, I change my gloves and really smooth out those raised areas. Also, if it's not a very warm day, I'll use a hairdryer, or in this case I'm outside, so I used a heat gun, and it just starts that drying process off nicely. Whilst this one was drying, I did another vase that, although that says £15, I actually got that for £10. I like to start with them upside down as well. It's a really addictive process. Not only is it a great way to give a high-end finish to unloved items, it's also very therapeutic to do. And now a table for just £5. This is a really solid piece. It's obviously had a repair at some point in time in the past, because you can see that although the strap work and everything is absolutely great on the pedestal at some stage has come away from the tabletop and it's been reattached. No biggie, doesn't make any difference. So I'm just going to use sandpaper by hand to take those legs down. But the top, I'm going to get my big boy out, my big marker, and with an 80 grit on, he's going to make light work of this. Now, I've got to be honest here, I was surprised when I start sanding this and I see all these red tones coming through. I actually thought that this was oak, and it's not. It is redwood, it is rosewood. And redwood is not really my thing. However, I have a solution. I have a way around it. And for those purists out there, I promise you I'm not going to paint it. No, I'm going to wax it. I'm going to slather this baby in white wax. It looks quite drastic to start with. I followed the grain. I've kept the grain quite open as well. I haven't closed up with a much finer sandpaper. As this soaks in, as this dries overnight, it will appear much, much darker. It won't be as bright. The pumpkins here are actually real pumpkins that I dried in the bottom of my range in the warming oven. Took several weeks, and then I finished them off with some white wax. This plant stand was found again in a charity shop, and again for £5. It seems to be a really common price point, £5. It's pine. At first I thought, oh, I wonder if we've got some oak under there, and no, it's pine. And it actually looks like a spindle that's been cut down at the sides and then had some legs attached. So I have no qualms about slathering this in paint, and I'm going to go on with lots and lots of Enfleur, which I'm going to apply really thickly and in a stabbing motion to create texture. And I'm just going to keep on applying the paint really thickly, and this is the first coat and the kind of texture that you can get. So I'm not going to let it dry off completely. I'm going in with my second coat and just helping the drying process start by using a heat gun. You could use a hairdryer, and all the time it's just helping create texture. I'm going to add a little bit more by using some builder's sand, and really just have a play around with it. You know, if you don't experiment with techniques, then you never find out if you can do different things. Now, I wish this had been a £5 price point. It's a beautiful piece of wood, £40, but you know, I've seen these things go for hundreds of pounds. When I was chatting to the lady in the store, she said a customer had just donated it that morning and she'd been using it as a fruit bowl. I loved it, but I knew I was going to have to get those marks off and change the colour of it. So I decided to use, and I know it's quite controversial, but oven cleaner. Now, I've never really had much success with the oven cleaning stripping technique. So when I found that I could actually buy this product off Amazon, because we can't get this in our supermarkets in the UK, probably because it's so toxic. So it's not something I recommend that you use regularly or on large pieces of furniture. But for something like this, just a small item, it really works. It's a really powerful product. I sprayed it on and then I agitated it using this wire brush. I gave it a really good rinse off and I made sure I was near no plants. I kept it well away. Bertie went into the house. There were no animals around. You know, you've just got to be really careful if you're going to use chemicals. I then repeated the process, each time just leaving the product on for 20 minutes, no longer. After its final rinse, it went onto the range overnight to dry, and it turned out rather beautiful, I think. I bought these garlands from HomeSense TK Maxx for just £9.99, and the price point was so low that I couldn't walk away from them, although they weren't really my colourway, but I knew I could change them. So this next technique is a great technique for revamping maybe decor you've already got. So I'm going to start with some Annie Sloan on Fleur. I love this chocolate brown paint. It's really quite a warm day when I'm doing this, so I've got some water there, and then I've just got a small stencil brush. I'm going to work with my darker colour all the way over the garland, but I'm not going for block coverage, so I do want some little bits of the original colours to show through. This actually only took about 20 minutes to do this whole row down here. You can see the boy is watching patiently. Ah, the furry supervisor, always by my side. After I let the first coat dry, I then went on with my next colour. So I'm using Cocoa this time, which is a lighter shade. And again, just using the stencil brush to apply broken colour so you can see the different shades coming through. When that coat's dry, I'll then go on with a much lighter colour. So you use very little paint doing this type of work, and it's ideal if you've got lots of test pots around and leftover paint. I have two fir trees that I bought when they were absolutely tiny, just from a supermarket. I think they were just a couple of pounds each, and they're growing really well, but they're outgrowing these buckets that they're in. Don't want to buy new containers, so I found a couple of filing cabinet drawers. I had a filing cabinet from years ago. I'd sprayed them up another colour. They were just rusting away in the shed, and I thought they would be ideal for this position either side of the porch. They've already got the drainage holes in, so I planted them up, and then I thought, well, I'll add some bulbs as well. So I'd just taken these out of my cut flower bed and they were drying in the garage. I popped those in the soil, and then just to cover up all that bare soil for the winter months, I added some fir cones, which I gather on my walks. Took those off at the beginning of spring, and there we are, beautiful narcissus bulbs, and the plants are doing really well. I often get asked how I get my fir cones to open. Now, I pick these up on my walks all the time. They're normally in this closed state. So I give them a good scrub, and then I just pop them in the warming oven, normally at about 70 degrees. That's the temperature that the warming oven on the range is set at. And I leave those overnight, and then with the heat, they just open up. Now, obviously, if you live in a hot climate, just leave them out on a table on a sunny day and they will do the same thing. But unfortunately, in the UK, it rarely gets to that kind of temperature. So this is a quick way of getting them open. And once I've shaken out all those little seeds, they're good to style with. And believe me, I style with them all over the house and through all the seasons. I love freebie decor. The next project is painting the kitchen table. Now, I did this right at the beginning of the year and I'm so pleased with the results. Let me show you how I did it. So I've had this table for many years. It's gone through many houses. It's had a paint effect on it. I'm so over it now. So we're going to paint it in old white and then finish it with clear matte lacquer. I'm checking the table for candle wax because we always have candle wax spillage. I'm also going to get underneath the table. It's a modern table and it comes apart in different sections. So I want to get a nice crisp edge on each one of these sections because I may need at a later stage to be using it as a much smaller table. I'm just using bits of cardboard underneath the legs because we're not going to make a huge mess, but we are going to be bringing paint and lacquer right the way down to the bottom. Now, chalk paint, like any other paint, performs better at room temperature. So if you store your paint somewhere quite cold, make sure you bring it up to temperature and then stir and stir and stir. You can't stir enough. It needs a really good stir. Now I'm going to roller this on. So I'm going to use tin foil in the paint tray purely for the fact that it makes clearing up a lot easier. I'm going with these microfiber rollers, which I absolutely love. And always remember with your rollers, rinse and spin before you begin. Takes away any loose fibers. I may use some brushes, so I've brought some in out of the garage so I don't have to keep going in backwards and forwards, but I'm definitely using this 1.5 inch brush, which will be handy for the cutting in, particularly around the base of the table. So the paint is at room temperature. It has been stirred within an inch of its life, and now I'm ready to begin. And whenever I'm painting a piece, I like to follow the direction, the grain of the wood. And with a table like this, it's quite easy to do it in sections. So that's the first coat done. I'll leave that for a couple of hours. I'll go back in with the second and I'll be able to pick up any of that show through. Now, I don't want to be wasting time washing brushes out, so it's cling film over the tray with the roller and brush inside and then into a carrier bag, or this is a bin liner, and it just stops the air getting to it and everything drying out. If you want a super smooth surface, then make sure you give it a very light sand in between coats. I've now done 2 really good passes over this and I'm happy with the coverage that it's given. I like the texture that the roller is giving, so I could have that completely smooth if I sanded it ever so lightly, but I don't want to. I do, however, want to do some heavy sanding on the side, so I've got my big Merker out. Now, this has got an extraction unit on it, so there is very little dust around. If I was to have that sanding head completely flat on the surface, there wouldn't be a speck of dust anyway, because the extraction is fantastic. However, I'm using it on an angle to create this distressed effect. So there is a little bit of dust around. And because we're now going to go on with a lacquer, we don't want any dust. So I've got my good old trusty Little Henry out. Little Henry's wonderful because he's really good for my hands because he's not terribly heavy. I'll link him below. When I was doing the distressing, I pushed the leaves of the table together just to make sure I was happy with the finish. Now that I am, I've pulled those back out so I can vacuum and then I can start the lacquer process. Now, lacquer can be a bit of a tricky dicky, so I'm going to give you a few tips, a few pointers. The first coat you should always water down, but no more than 10%. So this much water would water down by 10% this whole can, which obviously we're not going to be using all of that. Now, I am going to be rollering this. Normally you would use a foam roller, but I'm loving this microfiber at the moment, so I'm going to run with that. And as always, I am going to be lining my tray because I like to keep my clear up to an absolute minimum. And the lacquer, if you have had it stood around for a while, turn it upside down for an hour and a half, 2 hours. I've had this upside down every which way. Don't shake because you will get bubbles and you do not want bubbles in your lacquer. You want to stir and you want to really stir. Have I mentioned stirring? You need to keep on stirring because this contains flattening agents and you want them to be equally dispersed all the way through. Keep stirring. Did I mention stirring? I'm sure I mentioned stirring. I'm only going to add a little bit of water and then pour in my lacquer and then mix that together in the tray. Remember, that little bit of water there would do the whole can. So less than 10%, 10% absolute maximum if it's really warm. And remember, what do we do with our rollers? We rinse and spin before we begin. I'm going to apply 2 thin, even coats. It doesn't really like being back worked, this, so don't be tempted to get so far along and then come back and rework it. Just work in sections and there's no need to sand in between the coats. If you're using a dark coloured paint, then you can sometimes get clouding. So what I would suggest is that you use a small amount of your paint colour into the lacquer and that will stop any clouding. I've given the chairs a little makeover too, but more on that later. Pumpkins, orange plastic, hideous pumpkins. You can revamp your seasonal decor any point in time. Okay, yeah, I may have gone a little bit over the top on the finger protectors, but I am forever burning my fingers with hot glue. So this little technique is a way that you can transform these into something more in keeping with your decor. Now, you may love bright orange pumpkins, in which case skip over this bit. However, these do, never mind just being pumpkin transformed, they actually make really great bowl fillers. So you could do them, leave the stalks to one side and then attach the stalks when it comes to autumn, when it comes to fall, and then you've got multi-purpose bowl fillers. We're not done with pumpkins yet. Another way to transform them is to use the faux stone technique. This stuff will stick to any surface, so it's a great way to alter all that decor if you're wanting to change your colour scheme, you want to do something a little bit different. Then you don't have to throw things away, you don't have to go and buy new. Just invest in a little bag of this and dig out your old spices and herbs and away you go. Just when you thought it was a pumpkin-free zone? Well, this is not quite pumpkin, but it's quite pumpkin-esque. And this is the last time the faux stone effect will come out, I promise. But this vase, I couldn't walk away from it for £5. It was a great size, a great shape. And just look at all that scrumptious texture that this effect creates. Love it, love it, love it. Now a different technique to finish a table. So this old pine table, again, it's one I've had for decades. I've had it out on the veranda for the last few years. It's been painted so many times, but it obviously has had the weather get into it. So I've got the big marker out and I'm running the marker over. But as I was doing it, I kept thinking, actually, I really love the effect that the sanding was creating. So I only took it part way down. I made sure that there was no loose paint at all. But then, of course, you're left with a situation where you've got a lot of blonde wood, timber exposed. And of course, this is pine. So what to do with it? Well, I finished it with white oil stain. So this is an Osmo product that I use quite a lot of. I love it because you can apply it with a brush, a rag, you can control the intensity of the colour by how much you put on, how long you leave it for, how much you take back off. Now, to protect it, I covered the whole table in the top oil. It's an interior product, it's not designed for exterior, but the veranda is very undercover. And I did this quite some time ago and I'm pleased to report that it is wearing really well. The chairs that sit around the table on the veranda, I did a makeover on those as well, which is the same technique that I used on the kitchen chairs. So all I did was take a sander over and start pulling back the paint, revealing all the different layers, the different colours. I've painted them over the years. These are all oak chairs, so they survive very well on the veranda, being a hardwood. And I then just reupholstered the seat pads. A great way to help protect your outdoor fabric, particularly if it's not specifically designed for outdoor, is to give it a good blast of Scotchgard. hydrangeas. Oh, I love hydrangeas. I grow them, I pick them, I dry them, I decorate with them all year round. These are Annabelles that I dried at the end of the summer, and I changed the colorways of them by using spray paint. So less is more, and using lots of different colors really creates that visual interest. Golf balls. We have a huge amount of golf balls, and we also have a huge amount of moss. It can be very damp here in the south of England, so I thought, why not combine the two and make moss balls, which are ideal to decorate with and to use as bowl fillers, and they cost you nothing to make. After wrapping moss around the golf ball, I just use my florist's wire and wrap that round and round different directions just to secure it all in place. Give it a good twist to tie it off, snip off the end, and the spray bottle there is just to mist it, to keep it green, and then periodically when it's in the house I'll just remist in order to keep it nice and fresh. And of course you can do this with any spherical object. And for our final DIY home decor, yes, we're at number 22. I found these large Angelica stems. I say large, they're about 3.5 foot tall, from £42 to £2.99 from HomeSense last summer. And they've just been in big vases around the house, just on their own. And I wanted to do something a little different with them. Then I started collecting walking sticks, walking canes. And well, the two are a marriage made in heaven. So I'm going to do a DIY centerpiece for the table that may be a little different. So always look out for unusual items that you can style with. It just gives your home that lovely unique feel, and you really don't have to spend a lot of money to create individuality. Remember, the rule of thumb is if it makes you smile, then it's right for you. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you'll stop by again very soon.